This is Mommying While Muslim, recorded live and unedited. Watch as Zaiba and Uzma record their podcast, see their reactions, and find out for yourself what all the buzz is about.
This episode is brought to you by Guidance Residential, whose fall refinance special is finally here. Not only can you unlock a lower rate to save thousands of dollars over the course of your contract to own your home sooner, you can also receive $500 towards your appraisal fee. Visit Guidance Residential on Facebook or at Guidance Residential on Instagram today. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mommyingwhilemuslim podcast. This is Uzma Joffrey.
And this is Zaiba Hassan. I feel like it's been a very long time since we've seen each other because I've been MIA the last couple of episodes. I feel so badly about that. You've been holding your own, girl, holding your own.
Yeah, well, we gotta, let each other fly, and you are going high and doing amazing and great things. So I'm just happy to hold down the fort until you come back. I'm just happy that you came back. Please.
I know she's like, you're coming back, right? I'm like, never going away, never. You're stuck with me.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Alhamdulillah. That's awesome. How's your week been?
I was just telling you before we started talking. It's been one of those crazy weeks. I feel like everything goes well until it doesn't. Oh, yeah. And then when it doesn't, it's always one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. But you know what? You have to kind of like take each day as it comes, deal with it in stride, and do the best that we can do, right? Because to get caught up in it, to feel overwhelmed, really doesn't help the situation. So I am trying to be super zen, courtesy of my 4 a.m. morning meditation, yoga, and prayer practice, which I highly recommend to everybody because it's making me deal with all the crazy angst of my kiddos, and there's always a lot of them. And I am so excited. You've already beat me to this, but my younger two getting their COVID vaccine today. So I am very, very excited about that. But, I know you've had a kind of a crazy week as well. So why don't you tell me about your week?
I anticipated it being crazy, and maybe, I was...
Maybe that's why it wasn't?
Maybe that's why it wasn't. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Because my husband went out of town for about 5 days. And alhamdulillah, everything got managed, even though I needed to be at 2 different places at once. Much of the time, my sister picked up for me over the weekend, which was awesome.
That's
and
so
took my boys to the soccer game. And, moms were coming up to her and being like, hey, how come you're not screaming today?
And she's like, wait a second. I may look like a twin.
How much do you scream? How much do you scream that's what you're known for? And I'm like, dude, I'm the cheering section.
You have to.
Yeah, I have to. Who else can say goal for like 1 minute? Me.
Yeah, you can. You can.
I can almost
she
do it
has
for
the
90
lungs,
seconds.
everybody.
I've got
she
the
has
lungs
the
for
lungs.
it. So, yeah, absolutely. You ready for our soapbox?
I am so excited about our soapbox, especially about this particular case you're going to be talking about. So take it away.
So we all know about the FBI surveillance program that has been ongoing and is a measure of the counter-violence and extremism that that particular committee that was started post 9/11 in the United States, so that we could kind of preemptively prevent any terror attacks, domestic terror attacks, which I don't know, considering all the shootings we've had in America since 9/11 that weren't committed by Muslims. I would say that CVE is pretty much a failure. And in fact, the FBI would say it too, but they can't, because since 2011, there's been a civil suit against the FBI, and it's called Fsica versus the FBI versus Fsica, or Fsica versus FBI. I forget the order. Is it plaintiff versus defendant? Yeah, right. Oh, Fsica versus FBI. So basically, Imam Yasser Fsica, who used to be the imam out in Orange County, and, established good relationships, he thought, with the FBI, as many of us who have worked with our masajid board have invited the FBI, have invited local police into our masjids and been like, hey, we actually need protection against hate crimes. We actually want to have a good relationship with you. Whereas they were coming in and saying, well, if you see something, say something. And it's like, dude, could you maybe do the same thing? Which didn't happen. So hands did not clap both ways in this situation. So basically in 2012, the lower courts threw out the case, Fsica versus FBI, because what the FBI is arguing is state secrets, in quotes, because of state secrets, they cannot reveal what they actually did, what actually transpired, meaning did they or did they not pay informants to actually feed the people that they eventually entrapped, or that they eventually arrested. Because obviously Imam Fsica and the two other plaintiffs with him are trying to prove that there was Muslim entrapment that happened. And you can't do that when the FBI is blocking you by saying, oh, well, we can't give that information. We can neither confirm nor deny because of state secrets. So that headed to the Supreme Court on Monday, and we are waiting to see what they're going to say. There was a bunch of Muslims that went to DC outside of the court to protest and show that, hey, you need to unlock this. Enough is enough. We've gone through 3 administrations now with this garbage. It's time to reveal the truth. I don't know if that's going to happen without a lot of pressure from our community, not on the Supreme Court because they're supposed to remain impartial, but on the FBI, and send your local bureaus, letters and say, hey, this is not cool, man. Like if you've got dudes fronting in our masajid still, like cut it out because we're coming after you. Local police, if you're fronting in our masjid and like posing and trying to entrap our boys, because it's usually young men that they entrapped, right? If you're trying to do that, we are coming after you and shutting your department down. You already know that we want to defund police and close your police stations. Like, don't give us more fodder. We're already really pissed mamas. So that's our soapbox for today.
You take it there, and I am all for
Burn
it.
it all down.
She's like, the Uzma's philosophy is like, take it all down and rebuild. Which
rebuild it with women.
Rebuild it with women. I'm good. I'm good with that. I'm totally good with that. And the
Women
truth of the matter
officers.
is, they do go after these young boys. And let's just be real, their frontal lobes are not developed, and they're stupid. They're just stupid little kids. And it's really a shame because that's who they go after, truly go after. And so as a mom of an 18-year-old boy, I am nervous about that. And actually somebody posted on my Facebook page today, which I think is great advice, and everybody should do it. When your kid turns 18, make sure they have your lawyer's number.
Yep.
I didn't even think about that. And you best believe my lawyer is going into his phone because now they could be counted as an adult. We are totally conflicted about whether we call this series this month the Latina Muslimah or Latin Muslimah, because both Arabic have feminine and masculine pronouns, as we know. And we're just not exactly sure how to do that noun adjective agreements here, even though Uzma is pretty fluent in Spanish and I am passable in my Spanish for taking it. So we're gonna have to follow our guest lead on that. But in any case, we had a lot of new listeners let us know about how much they appreciated our montage last week, probably because it was about our favorite topic, or at least half of our favorite topics, and we're not going to let you know which one, sex and sexuality. And I really wish I was surprised, or the fact that I keep getting surprised by this, but it's just something that people are just fascinated with, Muslim moms and sexuality. Okay, let's do that. I'm glad we can serve, and glad that you enjoyed the montage, and I really appreciate Joe and Uzma and our entire team for putting that together, because guys, it is not easy to do that, and I have been MIA, so I definitely appreciate that. But we know what to do now for our February series, because we have a long list of things and items and topics that people want to talk about, and it might have to go like 2 months. Let's talk about that later, or maybe we have another podcast about it. You never know. But I am so excited for this young lady here today. Her name is Eva Martineau. She is a certified nurse, midwife, and IBCLC. I'm going to have her explain what that is because I have no clue. And she has her MPH from Columbia University. That is, guys, Masters in Public Health. Columbia University. So we're going to give her some claps for that. She has worked in maternal child health research, which is music to Uzma's ears because she loves all about that. Her work allowed her to create hospital policies that serve moms and babies better, which we need. And while there, she decided she wanted to get more degrees and more education because she didn't have enough. So she decided she was bored. She's like, let's come up with a couple more letters after my name. And she decided to get her second BSN in nursing so that she can go on and get her master's in nurse midwifery, which Uzma's favorite show of all times is The Midwife. So Eva and Uzma are going to be BFFs after this, and I'm going to feel sad. I'm just like so exhausted from reading all her accolades, but we are so blessed to have her on this show today. Welcome, Eva, and we really appreciate your insights here today.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah, ladies. Thank you so much. I'm honored. As you guys know, I'm a big fan. I've been listening for a while now, and you're a fan with the way that you guys have chosen to amplify a lot of minority voices, and so here you are doing it again.
We're trying our best, ladies.
Trying our best. We so appreciate our fans. Like when we reached out and you said, "Oh, I've listened to almost every podcast." Like I literally had to sit down. Like, oh my gosh, very rarely happens.
Other than us? Okay, and not even us.
I get to actually meet a listener. This is amazing. Yay! It just really totally made our day. Made our week actually. So we really appreciate it. And, I'm so excited, especially, after that bio. It's like, wow, we have listeners who are really smart.
Yeah.
I don't think we're not. So that's amazing.
No, not
Alhamdulillah.
Not at all. Alhamdulillah. I've really,
wonderful.
Like I said, I've enjoyed the podcast. I'm a podcast while I work person. I podcast while I wash dishes. I podcast while I clean. I podcast while I drive. And so, you guys have been on my chores with me for the past month.
Wonderful.
If we can be with you while you're washing the dishes. Exactly. I was like, if we're going to do the washing dishes, we are in. I love it.
We are totally in.
That's right.
So Ava, we usually kick off, as you know, by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about their mommying story, whatever they're comfortable sharing, and their mommying philosophy.
Sure. So I've got 3 daughters that I birthed. I also breastfed 2 of my daughter's kids, so I count those towards my kids. Islamically, they count. So 2 that I did not birth, but 3 daughters that I'm raising, ages 9, 3. So we all know what happens around the 3-year mark for me. And this year it didn't happen because my kid's 3. I'm not pregnant, so somehow I was spared. And yeah, so a little bit about. I was raised in a beautiful home, in a non-Muslim home. I became Muslim 18 years, and so there's a lot that I have taken from my parents because I had a very beautiful upbringing, and there's a lot that I'm sort of making up on my own as I try to adapt the beauties from Islam and the beauties from my different cultures, and then an immigrant and taking the good that this country has to offer as well, and this environment has to offer. I approach my parenting with the golden rule. I find like that has helped me more than anything in my approach to the kids. Treat them how I want to be treated. A lot of times I'm good at it, and a lot of times I'm not. And then when I come back and reflect, I say, geez, I wouldn't have wanted someone to talk to me like that or treat me like that if I would have made that mistake. So I find that that has been, for me, has been like the ultimate exam in self-reflection. Like, I questioned myself more as a parent. Part of my life. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff. I've experimented, as you can see, with a bunch of degrees and careers and all of that. And still, I have never questioned myself and engaged in as much reflection as I have been as a parent. And so, again, just using that golden rule for me has been sort of my mainstay in how I approach raising the children.
I absolutely love that. It's such a respectful way, if you think about it, to think of the golden rule. Like, would I want to be treated the way I'm treating my kids right now?
Right.
And so I know that my daughter is really good about throwing that in my face. Like, how would you like it if I did that to you? Like, that's how I get that 10-year-old sass. It's a lot of fun. So you don't have any 10-year-olds yet. Just wait. It's
She's 9. I feel
But
like
but
she's already 10. Like 9
yeah.
quarters. She reminds me. I mean,
and
there
the
with you.
beauty and the beauty is she feels like you're doing something right if she feels like she can talk for herself
Hmm.
and tell you how she wants to be treated. So you are doing something right. And I
Oh,
love
that feels
that
good.
Rania
Yeah.
like will tell you how it goes because
Oh
that's
yeah,
how
she
we want to
totally puts us
raise.
all in our places.
I
But
love
yeah,
that.
I
That's a
think it's a
blessing.
great what you have said, Eva. I think um, it exemplifies kind of the prophetic model of
Hmm.
raising children because the children around the Prophet ﷺ were not abused. They all had agency. They all got to learn at his feet in a loving manner, in a very respectful, thoughtful manner. And I always say that if we are questioning ourselves, that is the humble position that we want to begin with. We don't ever want to say that we're so knowledgeable about anything, regardless of the alphabet soup associated with our names. We still don't know like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of all the wealth of knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. So it's a great place, parenting, to learn humility because that's where,
Absolutely.
yeah, I was a very sure, very confident person until I had kids. And then I was like, why don't I know what I'm doing? Why don't I know
Right.
what I'm doing and everybody else does? I went to school for
Absolutely.
a long time. I'm not smart.
Yes, yes. And humility is one of to attain closeness to Allah. And so,
Yeah.
however we find our path there, and wherever we can find our humility, well, let's go for it. Yeah, parenting for me has been that
Yeah.
path.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So you touched a little bit on your intro about the your cultural background and your immigration story, that family history, whatever you're comfortable sharing with us. Could you let us know what that is?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Mexican born. I was born in the state of Michoacan, in the world capital of Aguacates, city of Uruapan. And my father is Haitian, and he immigrated to Mexico. He fled persecution in Haiti at the height of the Papadoc um, regime. If anyone is familiar with that, and if our listeners are not, I say, go go learn
Go
up on
look
it
it
because
up.
it's really
Go
important.
learn
Yeah,
what they didn't teach us in school in the West.
learn what
So
they didn't teach
again,
us.
one more thing.
And so he fled. He fled Haiti out of fear of persecution. Actually, I mean, he was on a hit list. Many of his friends were
Oh,
killed, and he was up next. And so he traveled around the world and eventually became settled in Mexico in pursuit of his goal to become a doctor. He met my mom there, and they hit it off. And I was born there. We came to this country when I was 3 or 4, and I've lived my life here, between here and Mexico. Spending my summer with family and my mother here. So I have a very strong Mexican identity, and I am because my father left Haiti in a state of persecution. He didn't re culture until very recently because for a long time he was afraid, and he did Haiti. He loved his culture always, but he associated Haiti with a lot of trauma. And
Hmm.
so now I am like trying to learn Haitian Creole. And even though I know it and I
mm,
can understand if someone's talking about me, so don't talk about me in Haitian
yes.
Creole because you'll get in
I
trouble.
I understand that, girl. I get that.
And
Zaba's been on the receiving end of that too. Yeah.
I was like, you
uh-oh,
realize I
see, they don't
understand
know.
everything that you're saying, okay?
I love it. I mean, the look on people's face when you just turn around and snap back, and they're like, "Oh wow, yeah, I would have
You
not thought you
get
were
it.
Haitian." And so that we immigrated here, and this is where I've been. And by here, I mean I'm in Lenape territory, also known as New York City, and this is I went to school, and this is where I was very for the most part. This is where my now community is.
Well, I love that. And part of the beauty of I feel America, I know there's a lot of negative, but a part of the beauty is that we can, if done right, embrace all of our cultures and really pass that along to our children. And by doing that, of course, telling them the history, good, bad, and ugly, because we all have that.
That's right.
embrace the good and giving them that pride. So I love that you have that multiple intersectionalities, and you can do that. But I'm super curious about, you mentioned you breastfed two of your other children, and so that you obviously have an interest in lactation and midwifery. Like, what kind of got you or inspired you to do that? And I love, like, I nursed my kids for a gazillion years, and I really thought at one point that if I have to nurse another baby, I would just do this, because I was like this lactated producing milk production person, and I wanted to share with everybody. So I love that you did that, and I'm a little bit jealous because I didn't have that opportunity. So tell us a little bit about that, and explain to people. You mentioned, for our non-Muslim listeners, how when you do nurse, that they do become your kids. A lot of non-Muslim people don't understand that. So could you touch on that as well?
Absolutely. So and I have to say that two of my children, because we happened to get pregnant at the same time. She says all the time she copied me. She would get pregnant like 2 months after I announced I was pregnant. I have this community. I'm blessed to have my mother and my sister as support. I mean, I would have chased that many random careers if I didn't have a community to help me with my children. And so we sort of advertently breastfed each other's kids. My sister also embraced Islam, alhamdulillah. So we're both Muslim. Our parents are not Muslim, but super supportive and kind and caring. And in Islam, when you breastfeed another person's child, you become tied by kinship essentially to that child. And so that child not marry your biological children, because they're considered brother and sister, and you become like a mother to that child in the event that something should happen to the mother. I always loved this about lactation. When I was studying lactation, we learned that when inside of a person's breast milk are the DNA and biological markers that can actually turn on and turn off genes in the person who's receiving the breast milk. So by giving your breast milk to someone, to a baby, a toddler, what have you, and they're ingesting that breast milk, it changes the way their genes are expressed, almost akin to if you had donated your genes to them as a biological child. And this is just the wisdom of Allah. Like, this is learned in when I was studying lactation, and this is very reaffirming for me as a person who had embraced this faith that clearly we can affect how how the health evolves in the person that we've breastfed, and essentially become like their mother biologically.
I love that.
Yeah. SubhanAllah, that's beautiful. I had a milk son too, and sadly, he passed a couple of years ago. But it's not just genetic activation, deactivation that's happening. There's immunity that you are passing on, and you can trace those proteins from the mother to the baby. And whether it's birth mother or milk mother, it's just the most beautiful exchange that can happen. And in Islam, it's really sacred, and it does create like a mother-child relationship. So even the Prophet, peace be upon him, was very committed to his milk mother, who lived to be a very old woman. His own biological mother had passed when he was a child, but he continued to honor his milk mother for years and years and years. So the milk mother status is also super duper important. What do we call them?
Nursemaids, right? Like
nursemaids. Yeah. I think in English it's nursemaids, but in Islam, she's your milk mother.
And it's called nursemaids. Why? Because back in the day, slaves were hired or forced to nurse their babies, because the moms wanted to go back to their so I don't know what we should reclaim that word. We'll have to.
Yeah, we don't like the word nursemaid, because in Islam, if the husband and wife agree, milk mother is what it is. But if the husband and wife agree that the child will not be breastfed by the birth mother, then the father has to pay a milk mother. Like, the milk mother does not give her milk for free unless your sisters, like Eva and her sister, and they decided to do a non-financial transaction. Just give me your baby, I'll give you mine.
Dinner if she's still.
Oh yeah, you did perfect. There was an arrangement there. Love it. Love it. That's awesome. You cook dinner. I've got two. I can handle this. One on you. Tandem is great, right? Yeah. So
Right.
in Islam, the milk mother must be paid,
Absolutely.
especially if it's not an arrangement like Eva has. So there's no such thing as forcing a mother to give up her agency, her autonomy over her body, and the sacred bodily fluid that she has that has so many like genetic and immunologic and emotional spiritual pieces to it. So I think that that's a beautiful part of our religion. It's one of my favorite reasons for breastfeeding.
It really is. And Zaiba, I do want to uplift what you just said, that it's true. In this country, enslaved people were forced to breastfeed, enslaved Africans were forced to breastfeed the slave owners' children, because slave owners just didn't feel like doing it. Like
Often at the expense
any,
of
like
their
every
own
other
infants.
part of their,
Yeah.
at the expense of
Exactly.
their own infants.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was going
Thanks
to
for
mention
mentioning
that. Yeah, that was actually really, really key. And, I just am very fascinated because I also come from a very multicultural background. Part of, my issues personally, because of some things that have been done to me, as much as I am prideful, or I have pride in my various cultures, but you do associate some of those negative feelings towards that particular culture, and it's not fair. So, and in my case, that is for Pakistan and Pakistanis. And, I have a little bit, I'm still working on it in therapy, so we'll talk about that in another day. But I was very much fascinated what you said with your dad, because having that almost like that PTSD traumatic response to his Haitian background when he was escaping, obviously for good cause. But how is it that you, as that next generation and as a mother of the following generation, or the native born generation, how do you kind of combine it all so that they're appreciative of all the cultures, one, and two, recognize that there are good and bad people everywhere, and that you shouldn't necessarily assign an entire culture to that particular negative feeling. So how did you reconcile that? Because that is something that I have to toy with on a day-to-day basis, if I'm honest with myself.
Oh, absolutely, Zaiba. That's and that's something that I do intently when I parent. We are a Spanish speaking household. My husband is Puerto Rican, and he's, well, New Rican. He was born here, and so he learned Spanish.
Yeah, I love that.
Just
New Yorican. I'm learning
yeah,
some new
New
things
Yorican.
today. I love it.
yeah.
New
So
Yorican.
as a political act, I taught my children Spanish, and we speak Spanish at home. We watch our book in Spanish. Our books are in Spanish. Our play is in Spanish. And just, I don't know, 2-3 days ago, my daughter and my 9-year-old translated a contract for my husband, for her dad, into Spanish, because the contractor was Spanish speaking. And so even though sometimes she kind of rolls her eyes at me like, oh, Spanish is not cool, ma, like English is what, in Spanish, of course, English is, where all the TV, the slang is better, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you just made yourself some money, because this free skill. So
Yes.
Spanish is important. My father has, like I said, re-embraced Haiti to the point where he built a hospital in Haiti, and
I love that.
is very, active, loved by his community, all of the people who were a part of, and by the way, were puppets of colonialist America, but, and those were the ones behind,
Of course. Yeah.
the terror, not necessarily the Haitian people. But we, my also can be white passing, because my husband is black, and even though that's Latinos, right? We're all mixed up, and so you never know what you're gonna get. They don't even look like each other, and
Which is the best, beautiful thing. Oh, I get that all the time. Are they from the same dad? I'm like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
This is
No.
what mixed kids look like, and they're all beautiful. So sorry, not sorry.
I'm almost glad that my black child is the youngest, because then they don't think that, oh well, when they see my husband, oh well, that must be a different dad, because it has to be the dad, the youngest.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
But at any rate, we talk a lot about colonialism from a very young age. We are a very anti-racist home. We are very open about, what it is to me to be in this country, have a Black mother, and what kind of privilege you carry as a white, or, maybe like a child. What privilege do you carry? What your responsibilities are because of that privilege at a very young age. And so, this is something that children can understand if you are, conscious about their developmental, where they are developmentally. They'll understand. And you can teach these lessons, you can teach these hard lessons in a way that is meaningful, in a way that gives them responsibility and ownership over where their privileges are. And then in a way that, again, allows them to love the parts that there are to love. Because, Islam says, take the good and leave the bad. And, what better way to do it than by being open and honest in how you raise them.
I'm having some FOMO about not being mixed race, y'all.
We'll adopt you, Ozma.
Exactly.
I know. It's like I can teach my kids about colonialism. I thought I had an in, but it's like I'm feeling a little left out here.
I'll give you breastfeeding.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I'm done with the breast milk.
So exactly. Some breast milk. I still have some breast milk in my freezer. I'm saving to make some jewelry.
Yeah. Jewelry?
I love it.
Yeah, breast milk jewelry is a thing. Because you know what?
And I threw all of mine out.
No, it's got DNA in it. And so, God forbid in the future, if we need to clone one of the kids.
Oh my God.
Or me, it's available.
Okay.
It's right there. They'll be wearing it around their
neck.
I
would clone myself now so that I have a wife who's just like me. Like, why can't we just do that?
You hate thinking about your husband taking another wife.
But if
so
it's
me, okay if she looks like you.
If it's me, what do I care? It's if it's somebody else. But oh my God.
Listen, you just like turn the light bulb on a bunch of the entire Muslim male community. They're like, what?
Just clone myself. And then I get a break. I would do that.
Actually.
Exactly. Two of me ruling life, but I've never thought about that. But we are so digressing, and I love that we are doing that. Oh my God.
Hang on, Zaiba. I got to grab my charger real quick.
So while she's grabbing her charger, I wanted to talk to you a little bit, Eva. Like I love your energy. I love what you're talking about. But and then it's one of these things where I feel like, because we are mixed race, it's very hard to have a set identity. And it sounds like, you're teaching your children like the Spanish, that this and that. And unfortunately, we never learned that stuff, right? So my mother tongue was English, because my mom was English speaking. And my dad was trying to assimilate as best as he could, right? So like we lost that language, right? And it's so funny because now my daughter and my kids are like, why didn't they teach you Urdu or Arabic or something? Because we're so basic. And I was like, I'm really sorry. It had nothing to do with me, but that's the truth of it. Like the fact that you guys are trying to make that work and trying to implant some of that in your children is a beautiful thing. So how do you, I guess, rate your Latina, your I guess it's Afro Latina. I think that's the term. Your now Muslim identity. You have a little bit of the Haitian background as well. Like, how are you? And I would imagine half of your family, their grandparents, their maternal grandparents are Christian, and possibly their paternal ones as well. If your husband,
that's right,
convert or revert. So how did they?
My husband does not, but
yeah, exactly. But how do you reconcile that, and how do you teach them to love themselves and their beautiful, culmination of all of these things?
I think the hardest thing for me has been, I don't rank except for putting Islam and
exactly. That's what we do. We would put Muslim first, exactly, and everything else comes afterwards.
There's just so much beauty in everything, and the only time I would rank it is, by the fact that we speak Spanish and not Haitian Creole at home. So I guess that's what's more dominant. But again, my father, I've told him, when you speak to the kids, speak to them in Haitian Creole. I gave some of my kids Haitian Creole names, and we talk a lot about our ancestors. And that's something that is, in both Haitian and Mexican culture, not so much in American culture. I purposely, I interpret or I translate books in Islam to Spanish.
Oh, I
Now,
love that.
alhamdulillah, there's growing resources for Islam in Spanish. But when I was first, when my kid is 9, so when we were first started, there was barely anything. There was Sister Wendy over here on the East Coast doing things, but otherwise, it was few and far between. Now Islam is. I'm buying books from Spain. I'm buying books from Ecuador, and I'm able to build our Spanish-speaking library. And most importantly, for me, is for them to see that they can be Latina and Muslim,
Yes.
and that you don't of a Muslim because you are Latina, because you're a minority in the Muslim
Yes.
community. And so that has been a very active, again, part of the way I approach, meshing all of these cultures together. And I did want to just like make an asterisk because my in-laws are Muslim. They took Shahada 40 years ago. So my husband was raised as a Muslim, a Latino Muslim, and he was raised not just as a Latino Muslim, but he was raised in a Latino Muslim community. My in-laws were pioneers in New York City in creating a community that was social justice oriented, that did akin to different Black communities, that did work in the community, that fed the homeless, the entire, that did educational programs, and this is his upbringing. And so
I love that.
alhamdulillah, Allah brought us together, because I never liked Puerto Ricans growing up. And I almost told him, no, Puerto Rican.
You're like, I don't like the Puerto Ricans, but I'm just going to marry one and have half Puerto Rican
That's how Allah sets it up. That's ends up with what you say, oh, I'm never going to. Never. And then Allah's like, oh, I'll show you.
Oh, you're going to learn today. And I learned my lesson.
Exactly.
Those are our lessons in humility. And then he makes us moms.
Humility, right? There you go.
That is, I feel like that's the lesson for the day. So we're going to have in our show notes, Eva, a bunch of resources for people who like numbers like me to figure out, why is there so much racial disparity? Because maternal child health is really important to you. It's really important to me. It should be important to everybody who's listening here, and definitely to the people who aren't. In reading all this information about the racial and ethnic disparities that happen in birthing, and even the criminalization of birth that happens to people of color, but not to white people.
Oh, yeah.
Where do Afro-Latinas fall in the statistics? Because they have African American, they have Hispanic Latin, but then they're forgetting that there's Afro-Latinas. So I'm like, well, where are they? And what do the numbers say about them? So I'm going to pose that to you first.
Sure.
To tell me, because maybe you came across it in your research.
Yeah, on the actual population of Afro-Latinas is almost non-existent, and the reason it's non-existent is because research is as good as the questions you are asking, and no one is asking specifically about this community. The way that, at least in New York City and maybe in other places as well, the way that the public health data is compiled, we ask about ethnicity in our vital statistic, and then we will first ask non-Hispanic or Hispanic. And then if you're non-Hispanic, then we ask about race, which we know is socially constructed, but at this point is, when we're collecting data is, right? And so then you can then identify as white, Black, Asian Pacific Islander, or, and there you have your racial breakdowns. And so we actually, if we wanted to cut the data to Latinas, in New York City, we could do that, because we could look at Latinx, Black, or versus Latina, white. However, as far as the data is concerned, when we look at Latinos in this country and health statistics, it's really interesting. There is a thing called the Hispanic paradox. And really what that points to is that the Latin American community in this country, across so many health outcomes, when we talk about cardiovascular disease, maternal child health, breastfeeding rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they do way better than their white counterparts. With way less resources, with much poorer socioeconomic status, with much poorer just circumstances of recent immigration status. And so what researchers are thinking, because we don't really have an answer, how does this Latino population do better? How are they healthier than whites with a lot less resources? And whites have a lot more resources, privilege and money. What they're thinking, things. First of all, they have the community, and that community. We're looking at maternal child health. When we look at breastfeeding rates for Latinas, when we look at postpartum depression, there are significantly lower
Yes.
than white counterparts, and then drastically lower than their Black counterparts who are at the the helm
They're
of the
very high
justice.
risk. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when we breastfeeding rates, we are significantly higher than their white counterparts. What they're thinking is that the existence of that community makes a big difference. And I mean, the stuff we know, right? It's stuff that those of us in the maternal child health field have been screaming for years. You need your community, you need, in order to raise a healthy family. The other thing they're thinking is acculturation. So the level of acculturation, how longer you've been in this country, or to the degree, even if you've been here for a short time, how quickly you've assimilated to the American society and American culture actually has a negative impact on your health outcomes.
Yes.
As evidenced by breastfeeding rates and as evidenced by postpartum depression, even things like maternal mortality. And so the Latin American community is very special in that way, and is a by things like non-health related interventions, like just having a support system, social support, can have really outcomes for or impacts on health. And we think that we just have to go give to everyone or intervene medically and we can make change, but really the things that are most impactful have nothing to do with pharmacology, with medicines, and with medical interventions.
That is so amazing. And actually part of, I'm starting with this new chapter in my life, as Uzma alluded to, and part of that reason was to create this sense of community that we as women have lost. And why are the rates of depression and all of these things so high? And one of the direct correlators is the lack of communities, because we're all in our individual silos. So the fact that you're just reaffirming all the last years of my research, I feel good about that, because I'm like, it's because we've lost that. Like the fact that you're like, I need my sister to help me breastfeed so that you can go do something else. Can you imagine trying to say that to somebody? Be like, hey, could you breastfeed my kid? They're going to look at you like you have three heads. But the truth of the matter is, that's what people used to do.
That's where we come from.
That's where we come from. And we've lost that over a couple of generations. And so I'm not advocating that, just go start nursing a stranger's baby. I'm not saying
there
that.
are some questions you need to ask.
You have to ask some questions. Okay. But what I am saying is that concept of, can we help you? How can we help you? And how can we help each other is something that we need to bring back. And perhaps our mental health, maybe we can have a generation of significant mental health boost, because we are going back to our roots. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Zaiba, for that work. I'm very happy to hear.
Yeah. Trying our best, girl.
The reason I'm kind of honing in on, where do they fall? Where do Afro-Latinas fall? Under African American or under Latin? And it depends, again, like you said, it depends on who's doing the research and where the research is being done. So outside of New York, I feel like that population is screwed. And it matters because and I do have to go back to our intro. Latina Muslima or Latin Muslima? How should we do
I
it?
like Latina because I'm extra feminine. I'm going to do Latina Muslimah because
Latina Muslimah. Because I'm like, they have to agree.
Everyone will. Yeah. Latin is non-binary. So, in English, it's non-binary. So you're fine doing it if we're saying, if we're speaking English. If we're speaking in Spanish, you would say Latina Muslimah. So both are right.
Yes.
Both are right. Okay. So then we'll just call it Latina Muslimah, because I don't want to speak in English, because we do that every day.
Yes.
I think for November we should.
But if you're going to, let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if we have a non-Spanish speaking Latina come in, then that may be a problem.
I was going to say that.
We'll figure that out when we get there.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that that's important for our audience members to know that just because you're Latina doesn't mean you only speak Spanish, because there are non-Spanish speaking Latinas as well.
That's right.
And what I learned recently from author Wendy Diaz,
how are you?
The author of Hablamos Español, is that the word Hispanic is not used because it has direct ties to colonialism. And the European colonists who came and took over indigenous peoples and, named it Hispaniola and all of that, because a lot of them were Spanish speaking. So we don't say Hispanic if we can help it. We say Latino, Latina, or if you're speaking English, Latin, because remember, French, Spanish, and German and English are your Latin languages. So, and Portuguese. Thank you. I always forget that one. And I have an aunt who's Portuguese, but Whoops.
Well,
hopefully she doesn't listen. Yeah,
when we looked at data, like his health data and Hispanics, it completely this did not include Brazil, which is like a huge country in Latin America.
Guys, I'm going to come right back. You guys continue. I'll be right back.
Okay, sure. Okay. Go ahead. Say that part again, Eva.
Oh, I was just going to say that when we were looking at data, when we switched in New York City, at least, because that's where, I've studied research, health research data, when they switched from using Hispanic to Latin American, one of the main reasons was because it excluded Brazil completely when you said Hispanic, because Hispanic was Spanish-speaking countries. In Brazil, the main language, the official language is Portuguese. Yeah. And so an entire population was not included in the statistics for a group of people that are not a monolith. I do want to say that. Like, Latin Americans are not a monolith, and we are very, very diverse. But in so many ways, we are also, very similar, and it excluded the population, which was, very culturally similar to the rest of Latin America, and also geographically.
Exactly. So in talking about the racial disparities, the ethnic disparities that occur, it's important to know where people are, how they're labeled, because then that's how we can track outcomes, all health outcomes, whether it's birth or cardiovascular or diabetic and stuff. So that's why in research, I think it's really important that as people asking questions, that we're looking at our subjects appropriately and asking them, what are your identifiers? And that's super duper important, rather than placing the labels on them that has historically been done by researchers. And, that completely skews all the numbers and everything that we learn. And then if we don't know the outcomes, then we don't know what treatments and what preventive programs that there should be. And so this can hurt entire communities. And it matters to us because there is a growing population of Latin Muslims. And so regardless of where they are in the world, we want to make sure that they are fairly and justly counted. So given that, and your interest in birth work, it just seems like there was a perfect storm of bringing even your husband with his background into your life. Tell the audience how birth work is social justice work, because that may be lost on a lot of us who grow up with a large degree of privilege.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, in this country, the status quo of birth, where the majority of people are giving birth in a hospital, which has been named the medical industrial complex for many reasons, one of which is that it is for profit and benefits the people who have the money and want to keep the money, and most of the time it's rich white men. It does so at the cost of the oppressing everyone else. And more significantly, and at a higher rate, Black Americans, and then other people of color. It could be, depending on what health statistic you're looking at, Latinos soon after, or Asian Americans, or what have you. And so birth work specifically is social justice, because when people go into the hospital to give birth in this country, there's a lot of oppression that occurs. In fact, the oppression is widespread, and the status quo. When we're talking about oppression, we're talking about not, and on top of oppression, we're looking at harm being done. So we have emotional harm. We have a lot of trauma that is happening in the hospitals. People are leaving the hospital after giving birth with a severe PTSD, with all kinds of diagnoses that they did not have when they entered the hospital. And it's because trauma is widespread in the hospital. People are being, their rights are being taken away. They're being taken advantage of in the most intimate, part and time of their life. They're not being listened to. And then when we look at the cesarean rates in this country, which are obscenely high, double than what the World Health Organization recommends of 15%. Here in New York City, we have some hospitals hovering past 40% cesarean rates. Then we're looking at real damage being done to communities and to people who are giving birth. Midwifery at its heart is based on, at least in this country, is based on the granny midwives. So the midwives who were, who basically caught all the babies in this country, both enslaved people and slave owners. And these were the midwives that were brought over from Africa, enslaved, they had the training and the wisdom of midwifery work, of birth work, and they handed it down generation after generation. They were the ones that caught the babies of the slave owners safely, and they were valuable to slave owners because it meant that they could help guarantee a workforce of healthy enslaved people. And so in this country, when medicine became, especially when, birth became moved to the hospital, birth workers, especially Black granny midwives, were outlawed in this country until they pretty much disappeared in the 1950s. And when we reclaim that history of birth work, the real owners of birth medicine, we're going back to the philosophy of treating people at birth and undergoing the birth process with respect, at the center of their experience, not us as doctors or medical professionals, being the center of that experience, just even the way people give birth, right? Back in the day, they would give birth in an upright position, and in the hospital, you're not giving birth in an upright position because it's easier for the doctor to have access to your vagina. They don't bend down and catch babies in the position that is most comfortable to the birther because it's not comfortable for them. And so when we look at just both the very physical aspects of how we practice midwifery, with the patient being at the center of midwifery, and how we move around the person giving birth to their comfort, and then when we look at the history of what midwifery was in this country, and how it was outlawed, and because it just had to do with taking away the power of people and putting it in the hands of the white man, then we know that its roots, the spirit, is social justice. And when we re-embrace it, we're engaging in work that, again, levels the playing field, gives the power back to the people, and really it reaffirms the person in labor, and allows them to avoid the trauma. And by the way, midwives are associated with less C-sections, like significantly less. And the rest of the world is cared for by midwives. 75% of births in the most developed nations are cared for by midwives, whereas here in the country, we're at 10%.
Yeah. And I'm friends with Marina Farrell out here, who I think you might be familiar with the National Midwifery Association. And just getting to learn from her how, a lot of our undocumented population in America, they can't just go to the hospital, especially in my city, they can't, because the ICE truck is parked right outside of the door. And so I saw within 2 years the change in birth rates, where I was catching babies like every 15, 20 minutes. And the following year, as soon as those ICE vans got parked, I was maybe catching like 4 babies a night. So on a 12-hour shift. So I was like, where are these women going? And it was because we had birth workers in the community who were catching these babies at home and doing it the natural way and keeping those moms out of the hospitals. So, there was the minus was that maybe the babies didn't get the early interventions, and if there was a bad outcome or a high risk situation for a baby, wouldn't immediately go to the NICU where I was taking them. But at the same time, moms were not being traumatized further by being afraid that upon discharge, I'm going to end up going to ICE detention and being deported with my newborn, which is a criminalization in this country that is happening, not just separating babies from their moms at our borders like we've done, and now we have so many that are lost in the system, being placed in foster homes away from their birth mothers, by the way, who have been shipped off, but also releasing these moms with newborns into ICE detention centers. And at least where I am, it's literally called the ICE box because it's freezing cold there. And to expose days old babies to those kinds of conditions, postpartum mothers to those kind of conditions, it goes against everything that a birth worker, a mom, a human being thinks is normal for another human being. Like, if you have any shards of humanity in you, you will know that that's inappropriate. You will know that it's inappropriate to send a postpartum mother who has a blood sugar in the 500s or 600s. You would not release her. You would give her medical attention and take care of her diabetes so that she can be healthy for this newborn that she just had. No, ICE is just going to let her out into the community and say, oh, maybe find a doctor if you can. So if you're a person of color, I can tell you on the inside, and Eva can tell you on the inside, it is completely different the way that women of color, people of color are treated in the medical system, especially our moms and babies. And if we're not doing that birth work and intervening in these kinds of ways, and, Eva, I don't want to downplay what you're doing, but it's like, you don't have to be a doctor to change that. Maybe become a hospital administrator, go into public health and, present the numbers and present like the correct categories and identifiers of people and say, hey, this is what's happening to them. And from the inside, manifest that change, create that change. I guarantee that you'll be helping a lot of Muslims in this, because the amount of research that's done on Muslims in, what their birthing outcomes are. I think I've read one study so far. And even in that, it didn't separate. It was Arabs. It was all Arabs that were counted, as if that is the majority. And that is not the majority of Muslims, guys. That's like, only 20% of all of Muslims. So in America, we need to open our minds and our brains and our hearts a little bit more and fix what's happening. So in my city, we've got, we're preparing for 300 pregnant Afghan refugees coming. So can you explain to the audience how not having the proper resources set up to address these refugees, and how states not covering the care of these refugees is going to, affect the financial state of our community, of our society? Why it makes sense, bottom line sense, to provide resources for birth and for early neonatal intervention, why it's economically, not just a social justice issue, but also an economic issue.
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. In New York City, thank goodness, we have the PCAP program, which allows for undocumented individuals to qualify and receive prenatal and postpartum services, I think up to 6 weeks, which is still total BS, but at least it's something. You don't need to prove your immigration status. If we don't do this, and if we don't provide prenatal care, exactly what you talked about, we will be, and now birth work and birth is for the majority of people safe outside of the hospital. However, birth can be dangerous for people who are high risk. And if we are not going to allow access for people who are high risk to give birth in a hospital where they need the services of the NICU, where they need the services of medication and medical interventions, we're going to pay for it because we're going to end up with a bunch of sick people. And it's really expensive to care for sick people. I mean, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but a NICU stay for one night costs thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how medically complex that baby is. It doesn't behoove us to do this when we can just pay for prenatal care, which is super cheap, by the way. I mean, we're just listening with a Doppler and we're checking some blood work. That's it. A midwife will go far and beyond and care for and hopefully, doctors are also doing the same thing, care for the emotional and social health well-being of the person as well, their patient. But at the very minimum, right? It's not expensive at all. It's super cheap. And it prevents so much sequelae, so many complications in the long run that are, with just one intervention, super expensive, and that can be. And then we're not even talking about the psychological impact, right? When we provide care for people in a transition, like refugees status or immigration status, and birth in itself is a transition, and then you're talking about immigration, recent immigration and refugee status as another transition. If we're not caring for these people at the crux of these two transitions, we're setting them up for extreme trauma that will manifest itself down the line, either immediately or years or even decades down the line, and that we're going to pay for. If we really would just want to talk about money, we're going to pay for, in the lack of workforce. We're going to pay for in the resources that these people are going to need. If they can't keep jobs because they were traumatized, I mean, there's overwhelming evidence about how trauma, and especially birth trauma now, increasingly affects a person's ability to just live,
to
right?
function,
and to be a healthy function, and to be a healthy, productive member of society. Not that that is always the goal, but for those of us that are asking those questions about bottom line, then that is the goal. Let's be real. So yeah, it really doesn't cost a lot to care for people and to provide these resources, and it can really save us a lot of money. But most importantly, like you said, Uzma, earlier, it's the humane thing to do. Like, it's just simply the right thing to do. And as the U.S. claims to be this beacon of human rights, which we know it's not, right? But if we want to make that claim, then we really need to put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a very easy way to do it.
There was so much outrage when there was those pictures of the Border Patrol on horses whipping Haitian refugees. And, we saw pictures of men, but guys, there were women there too. And there were pregnant women, and there were children.
And babies.
Yeah.
And
they were getting whipped as
yeah.
well. So there was not enough outrage. There was hours worth of outrage that I witnessed, and then there was silence. And so if refugees outrage you that much, maybe don't create them in the first place, because the same country that is donating so much money to the refugee crisis and giving so much money to refugees and letting refugees into our country, we had a large hand in creating them, believe it or not. So
absolutely.
If a bunch of Afghans are coming and that ticks you off, well, maybe don't create the refugees in the first place. But that, as Zaiba would say, is a different podcast.
We could go on. And that's totally related to
exactly.
But still.
So, I think it's really important. I'm so grateful. Zaiba and I are both so grateful that you came on and gave the Afro Latina perspective, because, we've had birth workers on here before. Christina Friedlander, a friend of yours, came on before, and just, such intelligent, emotionally intelligent, like smart conversation that she had about the history of birth work and how it is social justice, and it is important to address the racial disparities that happen in our medical community. I think it's super, super important to have the actual descendant of the origins, if that makes sense, like an actual descendant of a representative of the communities being most affected. I think that that's really important, because even my community, even if you are an immigrant South Asian, you're going to be treated better than other communities when you're birthing. I'm not going to dispel or deny that anybody of South Asian descent or anybody who looks like me has not had birth trauma. I'm sure you're still a person of color. You've had some, but I don't think it's comparable. Absolutely. And I don't think generationally it's comparable. This has been happening for generations in this country. And so it's not oppression Olympics. Okay. I promise that's not what we're talking about. Right. But there's a long standing ill that has happened, and we need to fix it again, because a lot of it is happening directly to our Muslim brothers and sisters who also really matter. And we need to start looking and seeing where we can fix things, because some of us have that power to do that. So, all right.
Absolutely. And because it's translating to it's translating to women in this country. I mean, in New York City, Black women being at 8 times higher rate of dying post childbirth. So it's not just because, because it is oppression, but because it's translating to actual lives.
We're losing mom sisters dying here. So, that's our community. So Zaiba, as you know, had to run away and get those shots done for her children. She sends her apologies, but I am going to try to do justice to our favorite, the rapid fire. And I know you've been practicing, which is kind of cheating.
I didn't practice. You did? You know what? I have to be honest. I only know that one question. Everything else, I was like, I forgot what they asked. They asked something about if you could go back in history, but I'm going to really try to be true to the rapid fire and just not practice. So I promise you, I haven't even practiced.
Okay, perfect. So this is first thing that pops in your head, and I'm going to be really kind.
All right.
Because you told me that you were thinking about this. So what book are you reading now?
I haven't started reading a book yet. I'm still on my podcast.
We got to get you into our fireside.
I mean, the most recent book I read, which wasn't that long ago, was just a few weeks ago, Working Cures, and it is about health in plantations in the South, and there's a few chapters about midwives and mention about midwives, which is why I like it. But I picked it up at the Whitney Museum when my husband and I did a little baby moon, and it really just talks about the history and the legacy behind the doctors on plantations, the enslaved people, and the wisdom that they brought, and how, you know, white slave owners used
that medicine, and took credit. Working cures. Okay, we're going to put that in our show notes. Yeah. Next question is, where is your happy place?
Ooh, I want to say the kitchen. I enjoy cooking.
She enjoys cooking.
I love food. I do. I don't really like cleaning up, although when I've got, you know, a good podcast going, I don't mind the dishes too much. And plus I have a dishwasher. I just hand wash a bit of dishes. Okay. But yeah, my happy place is cooking. I like good food.
Yeah, well, you're very different than Zaiba and me, because that's one thing we can agree on, is that neither of us enjoys cooking. We do it because we have to, and like we'll get arrested for not feeding the children.
Oh my goodness. What?
You know, the law, CPS, all that good stuff. So, all right. Who or what was your biggest teacher?
Who or what was my biggest teacher? I mean, my kids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This,
you
right?
did answer that.
They teach me every day.
That is true.
I'm learning. I'm learning a lot. And I'm getting a taste of
yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm turning into my mom and dad. That's what I've learned. So, oh, here's one, because that was kind of like you already sort of answered that in the beginning. I'm going to give you one more. I know we're over time and I don't care. Okay. What qualities do you admire about your parents? You did talk a lot about them, and, you know, we would love to hear more.
Yes. My father's resilience. What he's been through is ridiculous. He became a doctor at 50 years old. So, I mean, I don't know many people who could do that. And he was a farmer, a very poor farmer starting off. And he just never gave up on his goal to become a doctor. And he did it 50 years old. So his resilience is admirable. I really don't know anyone more resilient than him. And my mom's unconditional love. I mean, everyone feels like their mom is like that. But geez, my mom, I'm like, I could do anything. You'd still love me. Like, and it wouldn't even diminish a little bit. So those are two things that I aspire to, incorporate in how I parent.
I feel like those are incredible lessons for all of us from both of your parents. And to both of your parents, thank you on behalf of Mommyingwhilemuslim for being such exemplar models for you. And thank you for coming on and, you know, sharing with us your knowledge, your background in public health. I just, you know, we cannot talk enough about this topic and about the racial inequities in this country. And I know that some people, what they're hearing is like straight criticism. But again, going back to the very beginning of what you said, if we're not asking questions about, am I doing enough or can I do better, then we're not being humble. And it is a lifelong process. Humility, stay humble and keep figuring out how we can do better. It's not, you know, it's not something to get defensive about. It's not something to get offended about. We have to ask those questions, because even in our deen, you know, in Islam, we have to keep striving to get better, because we're not promised anything by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except that he is. Absolutely. And that there will be an accounting day. So we want to make sure that we're prepared. So
that's what when I became a midwife, that's the one thing that and I reflected on this, the biggest feeling I had outside of everything else was accountability. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, you said you wanted to do this and you gave yourself the reasons why. Now it's the time to do the work and remember that you're accountable to Allah. You're accountable to the people who supported you in this, and you're accountable to the communities that you said you started this to. And may Allah keep us with the knowledge and with the foresight of being accountable, so that we do the right thing. Because I think that, you know, if we feel like, you know, we're privileged because we're care workers or we're care providers, we can really
100%. That I think is beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I think that's what we're going to use as our pearl for the audiogram when we make it. I so appreciate it, Eva. So where can our listeners find you if they are looking for some midwifery expertise or just, you know, some inspiration for social justice work?
I have an Instagram handle at reclaiming_loose. And really, I'm, you know, hanging out in Brooklyn, caring for families outside the system, and just really enjoying it and feel privileged to do so. So you can hit me up there, and we'll see what we can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much again, Jazakallah khair, for your time, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. This episode is brought to you by Guidance Residential, whose fall refinance special is finally here. Not only can you unlock a lower rate to save thousands of dollars over the course of your contract to own your home sooner, you can also receive $500 towards your appraisal fee. Visit Guidance Residential on Facebook or at Guidance Residential on Instagram today.